What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses finds herself in the crosshairs of a talk show host who refuses to back down? Today we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had Halle Berry storming off the set of Today with Jenna and Friends, leaving viewers stunned and the internet buzzing. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story has more twists than you'd expect. The morning started like any other promotional interview. Halle Berry had agreed to appear on Today with Jenna and Friends to discuss her latest directorial project, a passion piece she'd been developing for over 3 years. The show's format was typically light, breezy conversations with celebrities, making it seem like the perfect venue for what should have been a straightforward chat about creativity and filmmaking. Jenna welcomed Halle with her signature enthusiasm, and the first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. They discussed Halle's transition from acting to directing, the challenges of being behind the camera, and her hopes for the film's reception. Halle seemed relaxed, even playful, sharing anecdotes about working with her cast and the unexpected joys of calling the shots on set. "You know, Jenna, there's something incredibly freeing about being the one making the final decisions," Halle said, settling into her chair with a genuine smile. "For so many years I was at the mercy of other people's visions. Now I get to tell the stories I want to tell, the way I want to tell them." Jenna nodded approvingly, but there was something in her expression that suggested she had more pointed questions brewing. "That's fascinating, Halle. And speaking of telling stories your way, I have to ask about some of the casting choices you made. There's been quite a bit of discussion online about your decision to cast relative unknowns in major roles, while some established actors didn't make the cut." The shift in tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Halle's smile tightened just slightly, though she maintained her composure. "I believe in giving opportunities to fresh talent. Some of the most electric performances I've ever seen have come from actors who haven't been pigeonholed by the industry yet. But there are reports that several prominent actors, including some of your former colleagues, felt overlooked for roles they believed they were perfect for," Jenna pressed, her voice maintaining its friendly cadence while the questions grew sharper. "How do you respond to suggestions that your casting process might have been, let's say, more personal than professional?" The studio fell noticeably quieter. Even the crew members seemed to sense that the conversation was shifting into more treacherous territory. Halle's posture straightened and her media-trained smile became more calculated. "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying, Jenna," Halle said carefully. "Every casting decision I made was based on what was best for the story and the characters. I auditioned dozens of actors for each role, and I chose the people who brought something special to the material." Jenna leaned forward slightly, her journalist instincts clearly taking over. "Well, there are some pretty specific allegations out there. Sources close to the production have suggested that certain actors were passed over not because of their auditions, but because of past disagreements or conflicts with you personally. Are you saying those reports are completely unfounded?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Halle's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "Jenna, I've been in this industry for decades. I've worked with hundreds of people, and yes, not every professional relationship has been perfect. But I would never let personal feelings compromise the integrity of my work. Even when it comes to actors who have publicly criticized your past projects or spoken out against decisions you've made." Jenna's follow-up came quickly, almost cutting off the end of Halle's response. "Because there are at least 3 actors who fit that description who auditioned for your film and didn't get callbacks, despite having impressive auditions according to people who were in the room." Now Halle's composure was clearly being tested. Her hands, which had been gesturing naturally throughout the conversation, stilled in her lap. "I think you're asking me to defend decisions that don't need defending. I cast the best actors for the roles, period." But Jenna wasn't finished. "I understand your position, but transparency is important, especially when you're asking audiences to support your vision. Don't you think viewers deserve to know if there were factors beyond pure talent influencing your choices?" The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators were adjusting their positions to capture every nuance of the exchange, and the audience members who had been casually chatting during commercial breaks were now focused intently on the two women facing off on stage. Halle took a measured breath before responding. "Jenna, I came here to talk about my film and my experience as a first-time director. I didn't come here to be interrogated about gossip and unnamed sources. If you have specific questions about the creative process or the themes of the movie, I'm happy to discuss those. But these aren't just random rumors." "Halle," Jenna countered, pulling out what appeared to be printed pages from her side table. "I have documentation here that suggests a pattern of behavior that goes beyond normal casting preferences. Are you willing to address these concerns directly?" The moment Jenna produced the papers, something shifted in Halle's demeanor entirely. Her media-trained politeness evaporated, replaced by barely contained frustration. "What kind of documentation are you talking about, Jenna? Because I'm starting to feel like this is less of an interview and more of an ambush." The studio audience could sense they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the typical celebrity interview where tough questions were softened with humor and charm. This was a direct confrontation between two strong-willed women, and neither seemed prepared to back down. Jenna's expression remained professional, but there was a steely determination in her eyes as she glanced down at the papers in her hands. "These are emails and text message screenshots that were provided to our research team by multiple sources within the industry. They paint a picture of someone who might be using their newfound power as a director to settle old scores." Halle's face flushed with anger, but she fought to keep her voice level. "You're accusing me of professional misconduct based on what, exactly? Anonymous sources and alleged private communications? This is incredibly irresponsible journalism, Jenna." "I'm not accusing you of anything," Jenna replied smoothly. "I'm asking you to respond to concerns that have been raised by people who worked on your production. For instance, there's an email here from someone identifying themselves as a casting assistant that describes you explicitly, saying you would never work with certain actors because of personal grievances." The color drained from Halle's face, but her voice grew stronger, not weaker. "Even if that email exists, and I'm not saying it does, conversations in casting sessions are meant to be confidential. You're talking about private discussions that happen in every film production. But should personal vendettas influence professional decisions?" Jenna pressed on relentlessly. "Especially when you're in a position of power that you've never held before? Some people are saying that success has changed you, that you've become vindictive." Halle's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Vindictive? For making choices about my own project? Jenna, I've spent 30 years in this industry watching directors make casting decisions based on everything from personal relationships to studio politics. Now that I'm finally in the director's chair, suddenly my decision-making process is under a microscope? It's under scrutiny because people are talking," Jenna shot back. "When multiple sources independently describe the same pattern of behavior, it becomes news. And when that behavior potentially affects the careers of other actors, it becomes a story worth investigating." Halle stood up abruptly, her chair sliding backward with the force of her movement. "You want to talk about affecting careers? What do you think this ambush interview is doing to mine? You invited me here under false pretenses to attack my character based on gossip and supposed evidence that I haven't even been allowed to examine." The studio fell completely silent except for the hum of cameras and equipment. Even Jenna seemed momentarily taken aback by the intensity of Halle's reaction, but she recovered quickly. "Sit down, Halle. Let's have an adult conversation about this," Jenna said, her tone shifting to something that sounded almost condescending. "If these allegations are false, this is your opportunity to set the record straight." "My opportunity?" Halle's voice rose for the first time. "You've already convicted me in the court of public opinion by presenting these supposed smoking guns on national television. You think I don't know how this works? By tomorrow, every entertainment blog will be running headlines about my alleged vindictive behavior, regardless of how I respond to your accusations." Jenna's co-host, Marcus, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "Halle, I think what Jenna is trying to do is give you a platform to address these concerns head-on. Isn't that better than letting rumors fester unchallenged?" Halle whirled toward Marcus, her frustration now directed at both hosts. "A platform? This isn't a platform, this is a trial. And apparently I wasn't informed that I was the defendant until I was already in the witness chair. That's not fair, Jenna interjected. We're journalists. It's our job to ask tough questions, especially when there are credible concerns about how people in positions of power are using that influence. Credible according to whom? Halle demanded. You've shown me papers that I can't verify, quoted sources that won't identify themselves, and made allegations that you can't prove. That's not journalism, Jenna. That's character assassination dressed up as investigative reporting. The tension between the two women was electric now, with neither willing to give ground. Jenna's professional composure was slipping as she realized that Halle wasn't going to be intimidated into submission. I'm going to ask you one more time, Jenna said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Did you or did you not exclude actors from your film because of personal conflicts rather than their suitability for the roles? Halle stared at her for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. I'm going to tell you one more time, Jenna. I made casting decisions based on what was best for my film. If you don't like those decisions, or if you want to believe anonymous gossip over the word of someone who has built a career on professionalism and integrity, that says more about you than it does about me. So you're denying that personal feelings played any role in your casting process? Marcus jumped in, clearly trying to keep the interrogation moving forward. I'm denying that I owe you or anyone else a detailed explanation of my creative process, Halle replied firmly. What I will say is that every director brings their own perspective and preferences to their work. That's what makes each film unique. If you want to call that vindictive, that's your choice. Jenna seized on the opening. But when your perspective includes punishing actors who have criticized you in the past, doesn't that cross a line from creative preference into professional retaliation? Halle's eyes flashed dangerously. You keep using words like punishing and retaliation as if choosing not to cast someone is some kind of crime. Directors make hundreds of decisions during production, and not every actor gets every role they want. That's not vindictive, that's reality. Even when the pattern suggests otherwise? Jenna pulled out another sheet of paper. Because I have a list here of 12 actors who have publicly criticized you at various points in your career. Of those 12, 7 auditioned for roles in your film. None of them were cast, despite several having extensive experience in exactly the type of project you were making. The revelation hit the studio like a bombshell. Audience members gasped audibly, and even the camera crew seemed to lean in closer to capture Halle's reaction. For the first time since the confrontation began, Halle was speechless. She stared at Jenna with a mixture of shock and rage that was impossible to disguise. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Halle found her voice again. But when she spoke, there was a tremor of barely controlled fury beneath her words. You researched every actor who ever criticized me and cross-referenced that with my audition list? What kind of journalist does that level of invasive investigation into someone's personal and professional relationships? Jenna didn't flinch, the kind who takes her job seriously. When we started getting tips about your casting process, we did our due diligence. The pattern was impossible to ignore once we started connecting the dots. Tips from whom? Halle demanded, stepping closer to Jenna's desk. Who exactly is feeding you this information, and why? Because it sounds to me like someone has an agenda here, and you're letting yourself be used as their mouthpiece. Our sources are protected, but they're credible people within the industry who felt that what they witnessed needed to be brought to light, Marcus interjected, clearly trying to support his co-host. People who care about fairness in Hollywood. Halle's laugh was harsh and humorless. Fairness? You want to talk about fairness? I've been in this industry since I was barely out of my teens. I've dealt with directors who cast their girlfriends in roles I was better suited for, producers who made casting decisions based on who they were sleeping with, and executives who passed me over for parts because I wouldn't play their games. But now that I finally have the power to make my own choices, suddenly everyone is concerned about fairness? The raw emotion in her voice seemed to catch even Jenna off guard, but she pressed forward. So you admit that your casting decisions were influenced by personal considerations? I admit that I'm human, Halle shot back, and I admit that when I'm choosing people to work closely with for months on a project, that means everything to me. I'm going to consider whether I can trust them and whether they'll be collaborative partners. If you want to call that vindictive, go ahead." Jenna leaned back in her chair, sensing she had pushed Halle to a breaking point. "But several of the actors you excluded have stellar reputations for professionalism. Their only crime seems to be that they questioned some of your past work, or spoke honestly about their experiences working with you." "Their crime?" Halle's voice rose again, all pretense of media-trained politeness completely abandoned now. "You're talking about my career, my reputation, my life's work, as if these people have some inherent right to be in my movie. Nobody is entitled to a role in someone else's film, Jenna. Nobody. Even if they're the best person for the job?" Jenna challenged. "Who decides who's best? You? Some anonymous source? Or the director who's actually responsible for bringing the story to life?" Halle's hands were shaking now. Whether from anger or adrenaline, it was impossible to tell. "You're sitting here acting like you know better than I do what my film needed." The studio audience was completely captivated by the raw emotion of the exchange. This had gone far beyond typical celebrity interview territory into something much more personal and volatile. Marcus tried to interject with a calming tone. "Halle, I think what we're really trying to understand is whether there's a difference between making creative choices and using your position to punish people who have crossed you professionally." Halle turned on him with surprising venom. "Punish them? By not giving them a job? Marcus, do you have any idea how many roles I've been passed over for during my career? Should I have demanded explanations from every director who chose someone else? Should I have accused them of punishment and retaliation every time I didn't get a part?" "But you weren't in a position of power then," Jenna pointed out. "There's a responsibility that comes with being the decision-maker." "Yes, there is," Halle agreed, her voice growing steadier but more dangerous. "The responsibility to make the best movie possible. The responsibility to choose collaborators who will elevate the material. The responsibility to protect my vision from people who might undermine it. And if that means not casting actors who have publicly trashed my work or questioned my professionalism, then that's a responsibility I'll gladly accept." Jenna pounced on the admission. "So you are acknowledging that you excluded actors based on their past criticisms of you?" Halle paused, realizing she might have said more than she intended. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I'm acknowledging that I made informed decisions about who I wanted to work with. If an actor has spent years publicly questioning my talent or my choices, why would I invite that negativity onto my set?" "Because it's supposed to be about the work, not personal feelings," Jenna replied sharply. "Great directors rise above personal conflicts to serve the story." "Don't lecture me about being a great director," Halle snapped. "You've never made a film in your life. You sit behind that desk and judge other people's creative decisions, but you've never had to manage a multi-million-dollar production or navigate the politics of getting a movie made." The insult hung in the air like a slap. Jenna's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine hurt and anger underneath. "I don't have to be a director to recognize problematic behavior when I see it," Jenna fired back, her voice harder than it had been all morning. "And I don't have to make movies to know that using your platform to settle scores is wrong." "Settle scores?" Halle's voice cracked with indignation. "You think this is about settling scores? This is about protecting my work from people who have already proven they don't respect me or my abilities. This is about surrounding myself with artists who believe in the project instead of people who see it as just another payday. Or people who might ask tough questions or push back on your choices," Marcus suggested. "Isn't it possible that you chose yes men over genuine talent?" The suggestion seemed to hit Halle like a physical blow. Her face went white, and for a moment she looked genuinely shaken. But when she spoke, her voice was ice cold. "Yes men, the actors I cast are some of the most talented, dedicated performers I've ever worked with. They brought intelligence, creativity, and passion to their roles. But I guess that doesn't matter to you because they weren't famous enough or controversial enough to make for good television." Jenna sensed an opportunity to land a final blow. "Or because they were willing to work with you without challenging your authority. Face it, Halle, You had a chance to be the bigger person, to show that you could separate personal feelings from professional decisions. Instead, you proved that you're exactly what your critics said you were. The words hit their target perfectly. Halle's composure finally shattered completely. Halle's face contorted with rage, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper but carried the force of a thunderclap. Exactly what my critics said I was? And what's that, Jenna? Tell me exactly what you think I am. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and suddenly Jenna realized she might have pushed too far. The studio fell deadly silent, with everyone sensing that they were witnessing a moment that would define both women's careers. "I think you know what I mean," Jenna said, her voice less certain now. "No, I don't think I do," Halle replied, stepping even closer to Jenna's desk. "I think you should say exactly what you mean. You've spent the last 30 minutes assassinating my character on national television based on gossip and speculation. The least you can do is have the courage to be direct about your accusations." Jenna glanced at Marcus, clearly looking for support, but her co-host seemed frozen by the intensity of the moment. "Halle, I think we should take a step back here." "No," Halle said firmly. "I want to hear what Jenna thinks I am." Because she clearly came into this interview with her mind already made up about who I am and what I've done. So let's hear it. What exactly do you think my critics said I was? The studio audience was completely captivated, sensing they were about to witness something that would be replayed endlessly on social media and entertainment news shows. Jenna looked trapped, realizing that any answer she gave would either make her look cowardly or would escalate the situation beyond repair. "I think some people have suggested that success changed you," Jenna said carefully, "that you became difficult to work with. Vindictive, someone who holds grudges." "Difficult," Halle repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "Vindictive, someone who holds grudges. Tell me something, Jenna. When male directors make casting decisions based on their personal relationships and preferences, what words do they use to describe them?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Jenna's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "They call them auteurs," Halle continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They call them visionaries. They say they have strong creative instincts and know how to build the right team for their projects. But when I make the exact same kinds of decisions, suddenly I'm difficult and vindictive." Marcus tried to jump in. "Halle, I don't think anyone is suggesting that gender plays a role in this." Halle turned on him with withering intensity. "Aren't they, Marcus? Because I've watched male directors blacklist actors for decades. I've seen them refuse to work with people who criticized their films, who turned down their advances, who didn't laugh at their jokes. But somehow their behavior was just called selective or having high standards." The truth in her words was undeniable, and even Jenna seemed to recognize that she had walked into a minefield. But instead of backing down, she made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative. "This isn't about gender, Halle. This is about accountability. When you have power, you have a responsibility to use it fairly." "Fairly according to whom?" Halle shot back. "According to you? According to anonymous sources who weren't even in the room when these decisions were made? Or according to actors who feel entitled to roles in my movie simply because they auditioned?" "According to basic professional standards," Jenna replied, but her voice lacked conviction now. Halle laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Professional standards? Let me tell you about professional standards, Jenna. Professional standards would have meant calling me before this interview to discuss the allegations you planned to make. Professional standards would have meant showing me this supposed evidence before ambushing me with it on live television. Professional standards would have meant giving me a fair opportunity to respond, instead of treating me like a criminal in a courtroom." The indictment was devastating, and Jenna's face flushed red as she realized how badly she had miscalculated. "We're journalists, Halle. We don't have to warn subjects about our questions in advance." "No, but you have to maintain some semblance of integrity," Halle replied coldly. "What you've done here today isn't journalism. It's a hit job disguised as an interview, and the fact that you can't see the difference tells me everything I need to know about your professional standards." With that, Halle reached for her purse and started walking toward the studio exit. The camera operators frantically adjusted their positions to follow her movement, unsure whether they should keep filming. "Halle, wait," Marcus called out. "Let's finish this conversation. Don't leave like this." Halle stopped and turned back toward the desk, her expression a mixture of disappointment and disgust. "Finish what conversation, Marcus? You two made up your minds about me before I even walked into this studio. You had your narrative written, your evidence prepared, your accusations ready. The only thing you were missing was footage of me breaking down or confessing to crimes I didn't commit." "That's not true," Jenna protested, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Isn't it?" Halle challenged. "Then tell me, what would have happened if I had calmly denied everything and provided rational explanations for my casting choices? Would you have accepted my answers and moved on to discuss my film? Or would you have kept pushing with your supposed evidence until you got the reaction you wanted?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Halle nodded grimly and continued toward the exit. "For the record," she said, pausing at the studio door, "I'm proud of the film I made and the actors I chose to work with. They brought my vision to life in ways that exceeded my wildest expectations. If that makes me vindictive in your eyes, then I'll wear that label with pride. Because at the end of the day, I'd rather be called vindictive than be someone who sacrifices their artistic integrity to appease people who never supported them in the first place." With that final statement, Halle Berry walked out of the studio, leaving behind a stunned audience and two hosts who were clearly struggling to process what had just happened. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing the awkward silence that filled the space where moments before there had been explosive confrontation. Jenna and Marcus exchanged uncertain glances, both realizing that what had started as what they thought would be a routine celebrity interview had turned into a career-defining moment for all involved. The story of Halle Berry's dramatic exit would dominate entertainment news cycles for weeks to come, but whether it would ultimately damage her reputation or vindicate her stance remained to be seen. The interview had ended, but the real drama was just beginning as social media erupted with reactions. Industry insiders chose sides, and the entertainment world grappled with questions about power, accountability, and the different standards applied to men and women in positions of creative authority. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Did Halle Berry cross a line with her casting decisions? Or was she justified in choosing collaborators she trusted? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes drama from Hollywood's biggest stars.